Today, our reading is 1 Samuel chapter 25 through 27. And it's great because in this we're going to see how we can deal with major struggles I think that people have. How do we respond to correction? How do we deal with people who we have potential bitterness towards, people who want to harm us? And then lastly, how do we handle fear? First of all, in chapter 25, we see how we ought to respond to correction. There we see Nabal, his wife, comes to David. And remember, Nabal, his name means fool, and he acts as a fool in the story. And there Abigail, his great wife, she runs out to David and essentially corrects David. Says to him, don't respond, don't meet a fool in his folly, right? Now, when corrected, a lot of times, if not almost every time, our flesh comes out. We don't like correction, nobody does, and so we naturally want to rebel against it. We want to find reasons to justify our behavior, whatever it be. Correction is not something very fun. But we see David does something here that is key to us in responding to good correction. Sometimes we'll be corrected and it's wrong, but good correction. David does, again, something essential. He humbles himself. Notice it says in verse 33, he's now talking to Abigail, who just came and saving her husband, saving herself, saving their family through the correction that she gives to David. David then responds by saying, "And blessed is your advice, and blessed are you, because listen, you have kept me this day from coming to bloodshed and from avenging myself with my own hand." Abigail, thank you for correcting me because you have prevented me from trying to take matters into my own hands, rather than trusting in God like I should. And there we see David then course corrects because of Abigail's correction, because of David's humility. He then gets on track with the Lord, and then the Lord avenges him. We see Nabal, he ends up dying 10 days later. It wasn't through David's hand, it was through the Lord's hand. So how do we respond to correction? Humble ourselves. And then it opens up the opportunity for us to receive. Well, then in the next chapter, when we get to chapter 26, we see David is once again on the run from Saul, which kind of comes as a surprise to us because not many chapters before this, David had an opportunity to kill Saul. Remember, he cut off the corner of his robe while Saul was in the cave. And how did Saul respond to that? He said, "Oh, David, you are a better man than me. You are my child. No more. I'm never going to come after you again." And yet we see in chapter 26, Saul is coming after David once again. How do we respond to somebody who seems to constantly be after us? People who are obsessed with trying to bring us down, the way that Saul was with David. Well, notice how David responds. It says in verse 9, as Abishai, his general, says, "Let me run him through." Saul was sleeping with a spear next to his head like a dummy, and Abishai comes and says, "It will only take one strike. I'll strike once and I won't have to strike again." Look at how David responds. "Do not destroy him," verse 9 of chapter 26 says, "for who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless?" So, it says in verse 10, David said furthermore, "As the Lord lives, the Lord shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, or he shall go out to battle and perish." Rather than respond with bitterness, rather than justifying the opportunity to take his life, he could have easily done it. "All right, Lord, I was gracious last time, but you've delivered him into my hands again. Clearly, this is an open door from you. This is how I'm going to take the throne that you've promised me." He could have easily justified it. Instead, he said, "No, I'm going to trust the Lord." Saul, although he hates me, although he's an enemy of mine, is the Lord's anointed. And if the Lord wants to take him out through natural means or through battle, he can do it. He's in the Lord's hands. What a great response that David has to dealing with somebody who he very easily could have justified his hatred towards. How do we respond with people who seem to always want to get our goat, people who are always trying to belittle us and bring us down? I want to encourage you, especially if that person's a believer, just to say that is a child of the King. and hands off. I'm just going to give them to the Lord. They have the same Holy Spirit I have, and I'm going to trust that the Lord will take care of them. If they're not a believer, you can say the same thing. Ultimately, not that they're a child of the King, but you can say, that's in the Lord's hands. I'm going to let Him be my defense, my shield, and my buckler. All right, well, lastly, as we get to chapter 27, we see, unfortunately this time, David shows us how not to respond. How should we respond when fear rears its ugly head? Notice verse 1 of chapter 27. And David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. Notice, different tone now. He sees Saul, he keeps on coming after me. There's going to be a day where I perish at the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me than that I should. Now, the rest of the verse should read, than that I should trust in the Lord. But instead it reads, than that I should speedily escape, notice, to the land of the Philistines. What does David say? David says, you know what? God has been protecting me for 7 years. It's time for me to take matters into my own hands. There's nothing better than for me to escape to the land of the Philistines. We see that fear caused David to trust in himself and trust in the protection of the world. How we respond to fear, it's going to say a lot about where we're at in our walk with the Lord. I want to encourage you, when fear comes and you're tempted to give in, take that fear to the Lord. Do what David did in the other situations and say, God, this fear is yours. I give it to you. I trust in you more than I fear whatever this thing is. And then it's amazing, as you read on in verse 4, it says, and it was told Saul that David had fled to Gath, so he, that Saul, sought him no more. David could have easily said, see, my plan worked. But we know that no plan is better than God's plan. So we can easily try to justify it away and go, but look at it's called what I would call pragmatic gospel, right? Well, my plan worked out, therefore it must have been God's plan. No, that's just God's mercy in that. Doesn't justify our decision to do what's outside of God's will. It doesn't justify our decision to allow fear to be what is our primary decision maker. I hope you guys have been blessed by these studies, and I hope all of us are learning as we are opening up our Bibles and daily going through the reading. Don't forget, we do these Tuesdays through Friday, so we will see you again next Tuesday. What's that? That's April 7th, so we'll see you April 7th at noon right here, so be sure to get the reading. If you don't have our plan, go on to reachjax.com and you can download it right there. Also, we announced the past couple times, we also now have a YouTube channel, Reach Church of Jacksonville. We're posting all of our live videos and all of our archive videos for services there. So please go ahead and subscribe to that, and we'll continue to pump out all these videos. All right, miss you guys. Thanks so much for staying involved and active online. We love you, and hopefully we'll see you soon.